Well, welcome to this class on political theory. Today we'll discuss the concept, theory, systems, and all the problems connected with democracy. You know that democracy is understood first as an idea or a concept. Secondly, democracy is understood as an ideology. Thirdly, democracy is understood also as system of government. But the problem with the democracy or any discussion on democracy is that this term has been used by so many people in so many senses that it has been described by some authorities as the Tower of Babels. So many voices trying to make a noise, but everybody using the same term, democracy, but never in the same sense. So many people use the word in their own ways, and so ultimately to the ordinary people, those who have not gone into the depth of the meaning, to them it appears really as the Tower of Babel. Secondly, some other authority has described this problem in another way, that democracy is some sort of a hat which has lost its shape because many people has put on the hat and thereby the hat itself has lost its shape. So this is the problem with democracy. There is no one definite way of describing democracy as an ideology or democracy as a perfect form of government, etc. We, for example, if we see, often I say that discussions on political matters or political philosophy which started in ancient Greece, there we find that Plato did not like democracy. Plato's system or the ideal republic was some sort of a philosopher king, but never the democracy in the sense that we understand it nowadays. Secondly, another great person who started in a sense a scientific discussion on politics, Aristotle, he positively described democracy as a perverted form of government, meaning thereby that in his classification of government, he said that polity, he used the term polity is the best, and its perverted form is democracy, where demos, the ordinary people, rules. In fact, the origin of the word democracy is from the word, two Greek words. One is demos, means the people, and the other is kratia, which means rule or government or power. That means democracy is rule of the people.
Sir, I have a question. Sir, why is the origin of democracy is always sought in ancient Greek city-states, whereas we have examples of democratic form of governments elsewhere also? So why is that whenever we search the origin of democracy, we go back to these Greek city-states?
No, I didn't mean that. I have just said that they didn't have any idea of democracy.
Oh, they didn't have any idea.
They had, but they had as a perverted form of government.
Okay.
They never eulogized democracy. And you are right in one point. Perhaps you were a student of ancient Indian history that you want to mean that there are some instances in ancient history, India, where there was some democratic republics. But the difference is this, I said that so many people using it, so many senses. When the historians say that in the 6th century BC or something about this, that there were in Magad and Lichavi in these areas, there are some democratic republics, but that republics were not ruled by people elected by the people. There were some scope for discussion. That's all. That people used to come, and given the circumstances, they will discuss. So they say that it was democracy, but not in the sense that we understand today, that those who will hold power will have to be elected by the people. No, not that. Have you got any other things? Okay. So from this precondition that there are chances of misconception, of chances of some different types of interpretation, and which is still going on now, and it is a very, very, I should say, interesting concept in political philosophy. So let us start. That a democracy is an idea which I will try to give some sort of an acceptable definition in the modern period, because the whole idea of democracy in fact emerged from late medieval period in Europe, when there was within the church versus state debate, that it was the later period, then the conciliar movement. Now this means that decisions coming from the council, from this council to conciliar. And there was at least two figures, Nicholas of Cusa and Marsilio of Padua, who emphasized that people must have a deciding voice in deciding the affairs of the state. And that was very new in the context of the medieval period proper. And that was also within a few 1 or 2 centuries, the situation also evolved in such a way that gradually in Europe we find that in the post-Reformation period, democracy is being talked about. Democracy had its origin as an idea in the Renaissance, when the basic point was to be guided by reason, guided by human intellect, to accept whatever is permissible under reasonable argumentation. But it has again evolved. In the 18th century, it had one meaning. To the Americans, or in the first phase of Benthamite thinking, then in the early 19th century, we find another kind of definition or systems, but everybody using the word democracy as such, that is the rule by the people, somehow they mean it. Now democracy, I at the very beginning said it is idea or concept first, then it is also an ideology, and thirdly it is a form of government. So we have to proceed today in this class, at least confine ourselves to this, and then I would like to follow a methodology of argument that what some in the problem of defining something, there is one way of positive, this is this, another way that this is not this, that is by contrasting some other things, and we will try to discover the meaning of democracy or essence of democracy by contrasting with autocracy or totalitarianism or dictatorship, whatever we call it, that is non-democratic systems. Now to start with, we find that even very recent time, practically in the late 20th century, we have find that those who are fighting for democracy, I give some names. Lech Walesa in Poland, Václav Havel in Czechoslovakia, Nelson Mandela in South Africa, and Mujibur Rahman in East Pakistan, which is the father of Bangladesh, etc. Now, what they are talking about? They were talking about preventing, replacing, or destroying a non-democratic regime. And therefore, they want to establish, what they want to establish? Rights of the people, prestige of the people, dignity of the people. So these are the values around which we understand the real core meaning of democracy. Democracy is a form of idea where, I should say, the core idea of democracy is toleration. I again go back just in a minute that I said that it originated in the Reformation period, when the emergence of Protestantism, etc. Now that is, even in the name of religion, you must not choke the voice of the dissenters. So dissent, right to dissent, is the soul of democracy.
Okay.
Secondly, democracy believes in plurality of ideas. Democracy believes in multiplicity of concepts or way of looking at things. And since it is based on the grand philosophy of toleration, so democracy requires that kind of institutional systems which will allow that. We have seen from the late 18th and mostly early 19th century that any government which claims itself to be democratic allows for an institution called opposition with capital O. That is, there must be a group of people who claim that they enjoy the legitimacy because people have supported them, people have voted for them. So they are in majority. Okay. But at the same time, in exercising power, they cannot be ruthless towards those who do not see eye to eye with them. But democracy believes in alternative ideologies. But one ideology is very firm, that is, toleration is to be the principal instrument of understanding the affairs of the state or guiding the affairs of the state. Democracy cannot be just like a juggernaut which will be taken ruthlessly over the views of many people or that. So democracy's origin, if we go through this, is also very much complicated, I should say. And this is a very fine point to be noted. In the name of social contract philosophers, Hobbes had one kind of idea that he didn't say that people will have the right to challenge the government or the sovereign. He doesn't allow it. But at the same time, he said that the government will work for development of the individual, for bringing in order, rule of law, etc., etc. What for? For benefit of the individual. So Hobbes had this kind of interpretation. In Locke, it is very open, thanks to the context that elected majority and the minority, etc., and there is a discussion, then there is accommodation, and therefore this is a form of government. He put it in a very nutshell. The democratic form of government, what I mean is practically parliamentary form of government. It is government by consent. A government is in power, any democratic government, because of the fact that people consent to be governed by that party, by that power, by that leadership. For the time being, there is no question of any permanence in office in democracy. And here again, by contrast, we can say that autocracy or totalitarianism or dictatorship, they do not accept this basic point. Any dictator who comes to power, somehow, even by elections, a dictator may come. Hitler was elected to office by elections. So they will claim that we should be in power for perpetuity. That is the contradiction, and that it creates all the trouble. And secondly, dictators don't believe in the dignity of the individual, they believe in the prosperity of themselves. In dictatorship, we find what is glorified is the leader or authority. In democracy, it is the idea, the logic, the discussion which gets the first priority and most important. So it is very finely put that democracy is a form of government which believes in force of logic. So whatever we will discuss in parliament, outside, larger society, you go on arguing and arguing till we come to a consensus. By contrast, dictatorship believes in the argument of force. That whatever the dictator, whatever the totalitarian entity, whatever the autocrat says, that has to be accepted. So it is a command. It is a command. Not a question of diversity at all, even opposition, very disagreement is regarded as an offense and not to be tolerated at all in dictatorship. So we get a peculiar, when we come to Rousseau, Rousseau is regarded as the champion of democracy. Now what kind of democracy Rousseau means? Rousseau squarely condemned British democracy. And he said the British people are free only when they cast the vote in or cast the ballot paper. Only for that moment a British people are free. Immediately after, they are to be ruled by the majority party power, etc. This is, Rousseau say, is not freedom. Now what is freedom to Rousseau? He said that a man is free only when he accepts the general will, capital G, capital W, meaning thereby the rational thinking of the community. So by logic, by sheer peculiar logic, Rousseau says that the celebrated paradox that a person deserves freedom, but if he does not agree with the general will, he will be forced to be free. One has to be forced to be free by the community to see reason of the what is good for the community. But post-Rousseau philosophers, or even the whole tradition after Rousseau, didn't accept it. Rousseau remains a paradoxical, enigmatic, great figure. Rousseau was great, but Rousseau had so many lines of descendants. They interpret that phrase in their own way, and even the autocrats and dictators, they claim that we are following Rousseau. Democrats claim they follow Rousseau. The communitarians in very recent times, will come to that point later, they claim that we are also following Rousseau. So that is one type of paradox that we find. But more or less, I say more or less, practically speaking, democratic idea got some sort of a reasonable, cognizable form when we come to Bentham, utilitarianism, and a modified Benthamism, modified utilitarianism in John Stuart Mill. There we find that the concept of representative government emerges. And Mill wrote a big book on it, discussing the various liberal concepts connected with the representative government, the problems of representative government, the institutions of representative government, and his whole idea was that is the ideal form of democracy. Now that is Mill's form of government. Then again we find that this whole thing was challenged by others subsequently, and we come to this that Abraham Lincoln, for example, gave a very populist way of defining democracy, that it is a form of government of the people, by the people, for the people. But those who are adherents of this, they are happy. But there are certain rational thinkers who object to the term by the people, because no democratic government is actually run by the people. And whether it is for the people, again there is a difference of opinion. But one can accept the difference of opinion because democracy believes in diversity and discussion. But by the people, no. So in the 20th century or late 19th and throughout 20th century, we come to the concept of what has been called the elitist theory of democracy.
So how can people participating in maintaining democracy?
How?
How can?
Well, there are so many ways that we'll come to later on, so many ways. Certainly, people do not directly exercise power. We, from our own experience also in days, we go to the booth to elect our representative this much. actually who listens to each individual. It is not possible. It is simply not possible that power will be exercised by the people themselves.
No, our political consciousness ends there, only to casting votes.
No, consciousness is going on, but power, there are two different concepts. Concept of power and concept of consciousness. We are all conscious. A developed democracy like modern Western democracies, we are all conscious. Even the developing countries like India, we find that people right now have become very conscious. Even the ordinary people.
Yes, there are certainly some
So
sections.
the consciousness is something different. But consciousness does not give you power. Power to decide. Who decides? Anyway, we'll have detailed discussion later on. This is a concept of participatory democracy, etc. So, there is some sort of challenge to this very concept, what I say, by those who believe in elitist theory of democracy. Whether it is Mosca or Pareto or Schumpeter, very famous in our time. His main book for which he was famous came out in the 1942 file. He said that it is some sort of a competitive market of ideas. So it is a competitive model. Just in economics, he says that we accept a thing which survives in the competition. So also he says that a democracy is a competitive model in which groups of people compete for power, not the individual. Individual versus individual is not the picture what we find. It is the group versus group, party versus party. So Schumpeter gave the one kind of interpretation like this. When we come to across Atlantic, very recent time, Robert Dahl, he introduced a new concept of polyarchy, that is reviewing the functioning of American local government. Robert Dahl said that democracy is basically a competition between a few families in American local government for capturing power. So he called them new term he coined, and which became very famous since then, polyarchy. Now both this has been reconciled. Schumpeter's standpoint and Robert Dahl's standpoint has been reconciled, or Carl Friedrich's concept has been reconciled by a very eminent Italian political philosopher, Giovanni Sartori. But his main point is introducing a new concept of vertical democracy. That is the same thing going back to the elitist concept of elitism. Nowhere anybody can show that people actually exercise the power.
Somewhat like the trickle-down theory propounded by Macaulay a long time ago, although in a different respect.
That's a completely different
thing.
So this is the way you see the trouble with defining democracy is this. But I can just refer to a few, one or two famous lines from certain, that democracy is never finally defined or taken as the perfect. It is a challenge for going to perfection. So we go on experimenting, and that is the beauty and that is the strength of concept or idea of democracy. Until in different countries, till today we find there is constant efforts on the part of the parties, people's movements, all the time to achieve the best. What is best? Capitalist democracy is based, or socialist democracy is based, or the Panchayati Raj based, or what not. There are so many ways. Socialist democracy, new democracy, so many things are there. But this is a challenge which will live forever. So Lord Bryce said, or many other persons said, that challenge brought out by the concept of democracy, democratic governance, is its strength. So I think generally we have come to know at least an idea of what the word democracy means. I repeat, just to recapitulate, it is an idea, it is a concept, it is an ideology, and it is a form of government.